teacher go to school?
And he's your...
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason morons.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of Canberra!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink eye? Is this what pink eye is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
I had to actually Google it, being a Nazi man.
Please go outside and look at the moon quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Well, g'day and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 101 or 2 or something. And joining me as usual is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. G'day, mate. How are you?
Well, thanks, mate.
You're very well. That's good to hear. Chinese New Year come and gone, and a return to normality, and it'll be starting to warm up in Hong Kong now, I gather.
It's still cool enough, but yes, the at least on our building, the Chinese New Year decorations have come down, and it's no longer necessary to walk around with a red packet in your top pocket just in case you bump into someone's kid or something.
There you go. Well, that's got to be a bonus. Australia is basically covered in cloud at the moment. We've got some big storms coming our way, but not nearly as bad as a cyclone coming to the northwest and the Pilbara region, where they didn't think it was it was looming as a Cat 3, but now it's Cat 5. So we wish everyone all the best up in the northwest of the country. They're going to have a pretty rough night, one suspects.
Make
Jack,
sure the fridge is full.
Well, yeah, I don't think the fridge will be running for too long. So maybe the esky and the ice, Jack. Well, the big story of the week was the two nurses who were essentially caught on an online platform with an Israeli, shall we call him an influencer, who had a conversation with them that left a lot of people shocked. The two nurses, Rashad Nadir and Sarah Abu Lebda, have been immediately stood down. The Minister for Health has said he will not leave even a glimmer of light for them to return to New South Wales Health. I believe Mr. Nadir was hospitalised last night. An ambulance called to his place and he was taken to hospital, obviously suffering some form of stress. I mean, these guys would not have had any experience of the sort of pressure they're under at the moment. With the unedited footage, as far as we know, has been revealed, and it doesn't seem that there's anything provocative from the influencer there, from the Israeli influencer, that we might have missed the first time around. Jack, pretty ugly stuff.
Indeed.
And obviously these two will be sacked. There's a consideration right now of criminal charges. I'm not sure what they could be charged with. Would you have a better idea?
There's nothing that immediately comes to mind, no.
It may well be that they aren't charged with criminal offences, but they've ruined their lives, they've ruined their careers. I think the thing that concerns me most about their behaviour and their comments were that they would kill Israelis in their care at Bankstown Hospital. Now, there's a comprehensive review taking place about, I presume, the entire hospital and and certainly where they've worked to determine if they have misbehaved in that way. But we have a great health system in this country, Jack, and at least a group of people would now have suspicions about turning up to a hospital, requiring treatment, and to see if they're going to be properly looked after.
Yes, I think that's true. There have been talks of stripping them of citizenship, etc., etc. I must say that I don't agree with that. I don't think we should be stripping citizenship from people who we think are guilty of wrongthink. I think we should. It should just take its course. They're probably going to lose their job. A bit unlikely they're going to find a charge to issue against them, and that will be the end of the matter.
Well, I missed all of that. You might have to repeat that, Jack. I think the line between Hong Kong and the Southern Highlands might have just dropped there for a minute. Just tell me, you don't believe that they may, or that you think it's unlikely that they would face charges. Withdrawing citizenship?
No, I don't think we should strip citizenship from people for wrongthink, if you like, for expressing views that we think are abhorrent. That shouldn't be grounds for taking away something as important as their Australian citizenship.
Rashid Nadir became an Australian citizen. He's an Afghan refugee. He became an Australian citizen, I believe, 4 years ago. I'm not as aware of the circumstances of Ms. Lebda. It may well be she was born in Australia, but
I think she was. But that really shouldn't make any difference. If you've been granted citizenship, you're a citizen, right?
Yeah. It does raise the question, and it's not just a Palestinian v. Israel matter, but people come to this country. Should they check their ethnic feuds and fights, going back centuries when they enter the country? I mean, this is a country that's providing them with an opportunity. Should they be told, listen, you can't, you have to get rid of this stuff. You have to get rid of all your internecine feuds and hatreds that you've built up based on ethnicity and territory.
A Labor minister, what's her name? Maria Vamvakanu. She's a Northern Melbourne MP. She says no. She says Australians should embrace the cultural and global issues that our migrants bring, so that they can form part of our multicultural society. That would be an overturning of what's happened in Australia since 1945. Where the tradition has always been we have encouraged new migrants to leave as much as they can of that behind.
That's true, except to say, Jack, in reality, I don't know that it works that way. I mean, the AFP's dedicated war crimes unit was disbanded and put into something else, presumably counter-terrorism. So no one's really keeping an eye on those sorts of things. We have a number of unresolved or unsolved murders around Balkan tensions, Jack, that there appears to be no great desire to solve. So I'm not sure that that our government or their agencies pay much attention to these sorts of things until they become, a bubbling issue.
That's always been the government's approach, to say, no, leave it all behind. Has it worked perfectly? No, it hasn't. And with particular reference to the troubles in the Balkans, what did Winston Churchill say? The trouble with the Balkans is that they produce more history than can be consumed locally.
Yeah, well, we do have some problems there. We should actually spend some time on this, because some of our Ukrainian listeners get in contact with me and raise certain issues. I think you're right. The broad government, and when we say government, we're talking about governments going back, a couple of generations, say this is what you should do: embrace. Assimilate, embrace Australian values, assimilate, all this sort of stuff. But when it comes to the proper investigation of ethnic violence in our communities, I think there's very little work being done. There was certainly, when it comes to the Balkans issues, there's certainly a view among our Croatian friends that the Serbians were given a bit of carte blanche.
That's true. And if you look at how well that process or that government policies work, you would say imperfectly. One only has to go back to the days when South Melbourne Hellas playing Preston Macedonia would get a bit lively. And I think Footscray JUST, who were the Serbian group, I think
they'd often play without
Croatia fellow was stabbed.
They'd often play without spectators. Spectators not allowed in.
So no, it hasn't always worked perfectly, but I think it's a mistake for a minister to be saying, no, we're abandoning that idea.
Come on in. Keep your knives sharpened. Yeah. Keep your hatreds bubbling away, and come and do it in Australia. And I think, the overwhelming majority of Australians will hate that very concept, whether they are sixth, fifth, or first generation Australians.
No, well, that's right. Yeah, they wouldn't.
I mean, the trade-off is you come into this country, you're being extended opportunities that you would not have had in your homeland, and that's the price. That's the cost you've got to bear.
Yes.
That you check your ethnic feuding and hatreds the moment you walk through customs.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's reasonable, and I think that's a reasonable expectation, isn't it? We're going to look at the university stuff in a moment, Jack, but I just wanted to talk to you about the anti-hate laws in this country, which has gone through the House. I believe I'm not quite sure that it's gone through the Senate. I was looking at this last night. These laws have been created, obviously, with the spirit of the ugly anti-Semitic outbursts in our cities, and certainly in Sydney and Melbourne, in mind. But I just want to go through the bill. This is a second reading bill, by the way, so there are amendments, and there may be additional ones. But the broad brush of this act, Jack, is that anyone who inspires another person to commit an act of hatred, as defined in the Act, and we'll get to that in a minute, can receive a fairly long jail stint. These are federal offences. So let's look at this. A person commits an offence if the person threatens to use force or violence against a group. I think the laws of incitement would cover those, but those are vague, so fair enough. And then it goes on to say the targeted group is distinguished by race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, identity, intersex status, disability, nationality, national or ethnic origin, or political opinion. The Act goes on to talk about people who would seek to inspire damage to property or damage to individuals committed by other people on a targeted group, with that targeted group distinguished by race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, disability, nationality, national or ethnic origin, or political opinion. I think there's some problems there, Jack, aren't there? Particularly around political opinion.
Lots of problems with the whole thing. There's an old saying they teach you in the law: hard cases make bad law. These are difficult situations to deal with, and this sort of response will make the situation worse, in my view, not better.
So what we might see, I mean, we understand what they're trying to do, Jack. These attacks on property, burning of cars, synagogues, damage to property, people being abused and occasionally assaulted in the streets on the basis of their ethnicity. I think you and I would both agree, and I think most of the country would agree, that this is unacceptable and needs to be dealt with the full force of the law. But when we get to people who would urge another person to commit an act of violence against a person who belongs to a group that has a political assimilation or a political affiliation, I don't know that would pass through the High Court, would it?
Difficult to say, but the whole thing needs a rethink, in my view.
Yeah. Well, as it stands, Jack, a person who conspires or inspires another person to physically attack a person who belongs to a targeted group, we mentioned who that group is, can receive a jail sentence of up to 7 years. And when it comes to
what do you make
comes
of
to property, it's 5 years. Sorry.
What do you make of the term inspires and that? That's incredible.
Well, that's my word. I probably should read the law, and I will right now. A person commits an offence if the first person advocates the causing of damage to or destruction. We're dealing with property here, properties from cars. And the person advocates the causing of damage. The same term is used, advocating a person commit an act of physical harm to a person in a targeted group.
Yeah.
So advocates is the word. There are various checks and balances around. The first person is reckless as to whether the damage or destruction will occur. So that's another test for a jury or judge. And the damage or destruction, if it were to occur, so that's really interesting too. So it's not just the damage, but it is advocating that damage to property, motor vehicles, or indeed individuals, if it occurs, would threaten the peace, order, and good government of the Commonwealth. So what we might see is, if we look at this and we look at this through the prism of the Palestinian conflict with Israel, that might not be the way it comes up. It might be that one person who's a member of a group from one side of the political divide, sort of says some pretty awful things to his own group about what should happen to an individual within another political group, Jack.
You could stretch it to the Sri Lankan situation, which used to bubble away in Melbourne for quite some time between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. You just got to be really careful doing this stuff because, as you say, it's all very well to say this is the problem we're trying to fix, the one that's in front of us now. But these laws won't be restricted to fixing that problem.
No,
they will have
definitely
a lasting.
Not. It's much broader than that.
A lasting and wide-ranging effect. There's an old saying, God spare us from people with good intentions. They're the most dangerous people.
I see where you're coming from. I've seen some stuff on social media from libertarians and others that are saying, "Oh, look, I'll go to jail for criticising the government." Clearly, it's not about that. They're going, it's going to impinge on my free speech. It's not about that at all. It is about advocating acts of destruction of property or violence against an individual based on that person's affiliations. Now, I can see some of it makes a good deal of sense. Disability, for example, sexual orientation for another one, but political opinion, I'm just not getting that. And I think we do have an implied right to freedom of speech in this country, but it is only. It is an implicit right, isn't it? It's not explicit.
Yeah, it's been read into the Constitution, if you like.
It's been read in. So, I mean, look, these laws you might find that, the first people who are charged with this offence are not where we have the problems. And I think you've already made that clear.
What if you go back to the early 2000s, and what did they used to call themselves? The Black Bloc, who used to try and disrupt international conferences, etc. Right. And they were very fond of attacking motor cars and motorcades and barriers and all that kind of stuff. Where, if you're a supporter of the Black Bloc, where does legislation like this leave you?
Well, I would think that would be the same for pretty much any protest group too, particularly
Just
if,
Stop Oil,
yeah,
Extinction Rebellion.
yeah, all that sort of stuff. I mean, and National Socialist Network and all this. Not that we should ever have any sympathy for Nazis, but I think this is. I mean, I'm not going to say that we're using a sledgehammer to crack open a walnut, but it is, rather than a targeted piece of legislation, it is all encompassing.
Yeah. I just think there's always a temptation to say we need to rush some legislation through so we can be seen to be doing something, and it very rarely ends well.
Yeah, look, as I say, I believe it certainly went through the House last week, and it has coalition and Labor support. So the crossbenchers in that situation, doesn't matter how they vote. It'll just get through. So it seems like that. So this stuff will become law, and then we'll have to deal with the consequences of what to me looks like law with good intentions, as you say, but might have some. What is the correct term? Unintended consequences, Jack.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Speaking of this particular issue, Jack, a very interesting, a significant moment in the House during the week around question time. A question was put from the opposition to the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, who proceeded to explain that, look, we've been harder on anti-Semites than anybody else. He went to the display of Nazi insignia and swastikas, etc., and other things that the government has done. And then he proceeded to give what our Jewish friends would call a Shoah speech, his familial connection with the Holocaust. And it's significant. A grandparent, a parent endured and I believe also a great-grandmother endured the Holocaust, of Mark Dreyfus, that is. And then what we saw in the House, Jack, you had to watch this pretty carefully, but Peter Dutton looked at Michael Sukkar, who is the leader of the opposition, or the head of the House. Not the leader of the House, but the opposition, I just can't think of the term, but the opposition figure. And Sukkar got up and said, I move that the member no longer be heard. And it was just in the middle of that. There's a photo of Burke, Miles, and I'm just trying to think of the third minister in the Albanese, who were absolutely mouth agape in shock. After a gag motion is put, then both sides will speak on it, and then there will be a vote. The opposition lost that vote, and then Dreyfus continued his speech, Jack, and I'll just give you a little bit of a sense of the contretemps. And this is, I'm quoting from the Australian Jewish News here, and the coalition's tactics went down like a lead balloon with them. Dreyfus, so this takes us way back before the gag motion was put. Dreyfus focused on his Israel visit and attending the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. I have stood in the shadow of the main gate at the Auschwitz death camp, the site of a music festival that turned into a bloodbath, and that's referring to October 7, and a firebombed synagogue in my own home. And this is from the Australian Jewish News. At that point, reportedly at leader Peter Dutton's prompting, manager of opposition business, there we go, that's Jack, right, yeah. Michael Sukkar rose on a point of order, and the Speaker, Milton Dick, cut off Dreyfus, prompting the Attorney General to tell Sukkar, "You are disgusting." Dreyfus said, "I do not need the leader of the opposition or any of those opposite to tell me what anti-Semitism is or how seriously I should take it." Sukkar responded, "I move that the member no longer be heard." The gag motion was defeated. Resuming his speech, Dreyfus said, it's very, very, very emotional at the time. I am the son and the grandson of Holocaust survivors. I went to the commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz, the place where 1 million Jews were murdered, a place where my great-grandmother was murdered. And I say to members of this House, we have had a wave of anti-Semitism in this country right now. We need bipartisanship, and that is the effort of our government made to build the hate crimes bill we just talked about that was passed by this parliament last week, so it has gone through. The gag bid was described as completely unacceptable by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and we got a little comment there from the Australian Jewish News, got a little comment there from Independent Senator Jackie Lambie, who described the intervention by Michael Sukkar as a disgrace. What do you make of it, Jack?
Not good.
They've had better days, put it that way, in opposition. I don't want to put too much, I don't want to speculate around it too much. But Peter Dutton, there are times when you look at him and you just think you've got problems with anger. And this was an angry outburst. He didn't realise just how significant it was, but it was jaw-droppingly bad. So there you go. Any sort of inroads the opposition has been able to make over Labor's treatment of the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia pretty much got knocked back on Tuesday this week. We are recording, of course, on the 14th of February. Folks, a very significant day, by the way, Jack. I hope you've invested at the florist for St. Valentine's Day.
We don't have service stations to go and buy the flowers out here.
I actually popped into a florist in Canberra. They were selling a bunch of 10 roses for $160. Too much for my blood.
Yeah, no, I'm not a Valentine's Day type of chap, really.
Oh, well, that's disappointing. That's disappointing for your lovely wife. Moving on, though, we're talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, and it is perhaps starkly felt in our universities, Jack, and Labor and the Coalition have united to call for tougher workplace laws so universities can sack anti-Semitic staff and researchers. How do you feel about those laws, Jack?
No, I don't agree with them.
Right, keep going. Keep telling me. I love this libertarian streak that you've come up with. Well,
no, it's not really a libertarian. It's not really a libertarian streak about the whole societies, but universities are meant to be a petri dish for good and bad ideas, even really bad ideas.
I agree.
And we shouldn't be making it impossible to express bad ideas. That's what they're there for. They're there for good and bad ideas to be put forward and argued, and the bad ideas to be killed off, if you like, hopefully, right? So you shouldn't be trying to ban bad ideas. The university's problems is a lack of intellectual and ideological diversity. That is, there's too much same think going on in the universities. They'd be better off addressing that than trying to say, well, that's thoughts that we don't agree with. You can't utter those thoughts.
Well, Bill Shorten was, I don't know if the right term, inducted, may not be the right word, as the Vice-Chancellor of the Canberra University today as we speak, Jack. And he made a speech saying that he wants Canberra University to be a safe space for all students. Is that the role of universities?
Universities should be. At the same time as you were saying, you're going to hear some things at this university that you don't agree with. It's got to be a safe place.
Yeah, I agree with that. So what does that mean? Do we just have to have, security guards wandering around campus all the time? How do you deal with what is the exchange of opposite ideas that are equally passionately felt?
Well, that's always taken place at universities, and it's always been dealt with. Well, we'll call the university security people in to deal with a particular problem when it happens, but that has to happen when it's needed.
Should students be expelled for expressing ideas that the majority of the community would regard as offensive?
No, but they should be. But they should be expelled if they take physical action to stop people coming and going. If they attack, people on the campus because of their views.
So that's getting back to at least giving a nod to the legislation we just talked about, and that's avoid physical confrontations, avoid physical violence, and damage to property.
Yeah,
those are reasonable things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, this group is to be chaired by Jewish Labor MP Josh Burns from what's his name of his seat? Central Melbourne, anyway. The committee blamed some university.
I think it's the old Melbourne Ports, isn't it?
It is. That's yeah. I was going to say Melbourne, but that's
whatever that's called these days.
Yeah, whatever it is. Goldstein. Yeah, it is. It is Goldstein. Chaired by Jewish Labor MP Josh Burns, the committee blamed some university administrators for fueling attacks on Jewish Australians by failing to punish anti-Semitic behaviour. And it really comes down to what that behaviour is. If that behaviour is urging violence or leads to acts of violence or damage to property, then yes, you've got to act. But if it's just ideas, if people are exchanging ideas, however passionately, I agree with you. This is kind of what universities are for.
Yes.
All right.
And besides,
on, yeah.
those of us who've been to universities, if you think back on it honestly, don't tell me you didn't have some completely idiotic ideas at the time you went through.
Oh, dreadful, Jack. I'm talking about myself. Absolute rubbish.
So am I.
Absolute rubbish. But I was at least discerning enough that when the Sparts fronted me, the Spartacists, who were sort of a group of, I think they were Stalinists or Maoists, I can't remember.
Yeah, Stalinists pretty much, yeah.
When they fronted me looking for support and possible membership, I was at least smart enough at 19 to say, I just can't see anything. I can't see what's in it for me. What is in it for me? And gave him the flick. But I was smart enough, but still had some really terrible ideas.
See, last week the act that went through Parliament in the criminal code, where they provided for mandatory jail terms for making a Nazi salute, displaying a Nazi or terrorist organisation symbol. So I don't think you should be doing that.
That's where I disagree. I disagree. I actually wrote to Sam Newman about this, and I don't know if he read it or could be bothered, and I wasn't, I didn't want to condemn the man. He should know what he's done. I mean, this is in regard to his podcast. He claims Blair Cottrell came along for the ride. And the other Nazi, Sewell, Tom Sewell, was the interview subject. My explanation for this is, when it comes to Nazis, National Socialist Network or whatever they want to call themselves, all bets are off, and that's because 50 million people died during World War II, 6 million Jews, 4 million of them subject to industrialised massacres. That we know everything we need to know about Nazism, and we need to reject it utterly. So I have a different view about other groups, I would tend to agree with you about other groups. And when it comes to Nazis, I have absolutely no tolerance whatsoever for them, and that I just think because of the role of history, all these guys have long ago given up any right to argue their case, and And what's worse, of course, is that whether it's Sam Newman or perhaps a more skilled interviewer, what they're going to say is, "Oh no, we don't, we don't worry about the Jewish question too much." I mean, they love talking about the Jewish question, but they only do it amongst themselves. So the rest of the nonsense is, "Oh, Australia's losing its identity, too much immigration, all this sort of stuff." So it kind of legitimises. Those are sort of reasonable views for people to hold, but that they're the ones that they use to suck people in. I've heard conversations with Nazis on social media going, "Well, we won't tell them about the Jewish question straight away. When do we introduce the Jewish question to them? Because Nazism and anti-Semitism go together. They are never far away as awful partners. So when it comes to Nazis, just know." And people who do interview them, seek to interview them, seek to say, "Oh, hang on just a minute, let's just hear these guys out." They're appeasers. That's what I told Newman. You're appeasers or sympathisers. That's my view anyway. We obviously disagree on that. We'll move on.
Yeah, well, no, my view is we treat everyone the same, but that's just me.
I think we have special rules for Nazis.
Okay.
And that's zero fucking tolerance. We meant to touch on this last week, Jack. The Paran and Werribee by-elections, both state elections in Victoria, state by-elections in Victoria. Rachel Westaway has won Paran. The Labor candidate, whose name I can't think of at the moment, she's now won the seat. There was a significant swing against Labor
in Werribee.
In Werribee, yeah, big swing. I think 13, maybe 16%. But the thing that really caught me, and I know it's a by-election, and I know it's state-based, but the thing that really caught me is that the major parties, we were talking last week, the rule of thumb is that they get together for just over 70% of the primary vote. Well, this time they were less than 60 between the pair of them in Werribee. And, of course, Labor ran dead, didn't run a candidate in Paran.
Which amused me because Adam Bant seemed to be saying that the reason the Greens lost Paran was because Labor preferences the LNP ahead of them. And as they didn't have a candidate, that was quite remarkable. A former Labor candidate, lovely fellow called Tony Lupton, who was a former Labor member for Paran,
yes,
was a candidate as an independent candidate. But
there were a number of indies who did really, really well. I did look at the vote and how it broke down. No, don't have it here. But yeah, he did okay, didn't he? Got several thousand votes. Yeah,
good man. He was a workers' comp barrister when I knew him. I think don't know what he does now. But.
Well, the Greens' vote in Paran was down 16%. As I say, the Libs have won it. And look, given the circumstances, I mean, the by-election came about because the Greens MP, Sam Hibbins, announced his retirement after it was disclosed that he had an affair with one of his staffers. So he was gone.
Good Lord, is that a sacking offence these days, is it?
Well, it's a retirement offence in the Greens. Look, there is that power imbalance, Jack. You do have to acknowledge it. I mean, he's the boss in the office with his paid staff around him, and it is a bit unusual for him to have an affair. I mean, I think it was a bit much. We do sort of turn the other cheek with this sort of stuff a bit. And maybe that's what should have happened. But anyway, that's the reason we had the by-election. Sam Hibbins had retired because of the disclosure of this affair with the staffer. And the Greens got pumped, Jack. So, I don't know what lessons there are there. I think one lesson that we've got to look, if the two major parties get 60, 65% of the primary vote, then we will have a minority government. I mean, however the chips will fall. I mean, you've discussed the process, but if that's the way it ends up federally in May, I'm saying, then you will have minority governments, and you'll probably have minority governments forevermore.
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah, no, that's all very interesting.
Yeah, look, it's a by-election, so we shouldn't get too
What did you
carried
think
away.
about the New South Wales minister losing her job for using the big white taxi?
Well, she got nailed for one, and then it turned out she had another. So that's the point where you run the ruler through her name.
And she hadn't told the Premier that she'd done the other one as well. So she
That's
denied
the
it.
thing, because she had a conversation with the Premier,
Premier.
and she had failed to acknowledge that there was a second use of
Second
the big
and a
white
third and a fourth and a fifth.
And I
Yes.
believe, it's a little bit of that.
And-
That's just sense of entitlement. And look, I've never been an MP. You've never been an MP. I would never do that. I mean, I cannot foresee a chance where I go, hey, everybody, let's we got the babysitter in. Let's go to a winery and get shit-faced and leave the comm driver out in the car park.
Well, we don't know. We don't
before
know.
going
we don't
home
know
again.
We don't know that they were overserved, but we can probably guess.
Seemed like it was a boozy day, Jack.
Yeah, it does.
I may be
But
wrong.
This is a tricky thing, though, as to where you draw the line with that, because I immediately thought of a situation that I'm sort of familiar with. State government minister, she's a single mum, bringing up two teenage kids. Does she send? I don't know whether she does this or not. I know the kids used to go in and have dinner occasionally with her at Parliament House, because on a busy sitting week, that was the only way they could get an hour of her time between Monday and Friday.
I think that's a completely different set of circumstances.
But I don't know whether she did this, but does she send her ministerial car and drive?
It has happened before, and I think it's actually occurred in the federal sphere as well, where you do have a larger number of MPs, certainly on the Labor side of things, of women MPs, and some of them with young children. I don't have any problem with that. Any sense of connection around family. No.
But then it gets tricky. Okay, so they're ferrying the kids to a bit of sport and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes tricky as to where you draw that line, right?
It's I hate the term. It's a wretched cliche, but it's the old pub test. And if you ran that past the public bar, people would go, yeah, no, I got no worries about people doing this with their families, looking after their families, and particularly the young children, so they have some quality time together, because we understand, you and I understand perhaps better than most, just how hard these people work in terms of just sheer hours. Right? Where the transport minister, wasn't it? Not transport minister. She was.
She was transport minister.
Oh, good Lord, no one. Well, bloody the railway unions on strike again in Sydney. They just pulled the pin.
Yeah. Personally, I've always been rather fond. Well, back in the days when I used to drink during the day, I was always rather fond of a long lunch at a winery. But I think we can rule that one out as acceptable. Yeah.
Well, the problem is, if you tell the Premier and you put the Premier in a spot where he talks to the media and says, "I'm going to let this one go as a misjudgment." And then the Premier gets to find, after having done that, spoken to the people of New South Wales through the media, then the Premier gets to learn that there were actually a few other instances. You got to go. That's it. Yeah. You're out.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to around the world now. We've spent a lot of time in Australian politics today, Jack. So we'll be breezy here. Germany, 2 weeks out from the election.
It still looks like what do they call the CDU? The centre right party are going to win. But we sort of covered this last week. There was they kind of made, I think, an error of judgment in a few parliamentary votes. but they're probably going to sneak back in charge. But that, who knows what happens then, because there won't be a majority. No one will have a majority, and it's going to be hard to cobble together a working majority.
They've said, that's Frederick Merz, has said that he will not join in coalition with the AFD, the extreme right-wing party. But if the numbers fall that way, Jack, he might be a bit tempted.
Yeah, my instincts are always against these firewall things. What you say, well, no one will deal with them ever. I think that's not how it's going to work.
But you know how the media works in these situations, don't you? Can you tell me now that without a shadow of a doubt that you will not do X, Y, or Z? And circumstances change.
Yes, of course they do.
Anyway, what we did have overnight, Jack, is an Afghan asylum seeker rammed his car into a crowd, injuring about 30 people. He's been taken into custody, and leading politicians, including the Chancellor, have said, get him out of Germany. He will be deported. It looks very likely. Doesn't help Schultz or the left, I wouldn't have thought, this particular incident.
It doesn't help the centre-right or the centre-left, because they are both associated in the voters' minds with the current migration policy. So, and people are unhappy about it.
Meanwhile, Jack, in the United Kingdom, having a little bit of a blue there. 2 Labor Lords, Jack. We know they're Lords because they sit in the House of Lords, having a bit of a barney over international law. And this has
got sort of wider implications than just the UK at the moment, I think. The current Attorney General in the UK sits in the House of Lords,
Lord Hermer.
Lord Hermer, and he's very pro international law, and there's quite a bit of pushback from within the Labor Party about that, because, like me, they don't have a huge amount of respect for international law. So it's going to be interesting to watch how it plays out. There's a mistake people make with international law, that they think it's like our normal laws, our domestic laws, just on a larger scale, but it's not at all, because
it's more problematic than that. But let me explain. The rule of law separates humanity from savagery.
Yeah, but the rule of law doesn't have much to do with international law. International laws are just a series of treaties and agreements, often contradictory, of uncertain enforcement. They are very vague, and they can be read however you want to read them.
And they can be dismissed very easily.
Yes.
You only need regime change in powerful countries, like we have seen in recent times in the United States, which we'll get to soon. But this caught my eye, Jack, just in regard to this barney between Lord Hermer and Lord Glasman, it's been revealed that Jerry Adams, one of Lord Hermer's clients, by the way, Jerry Adams, former, what do we describe? Sinn Féin politician, nothing to do with the IRA or the provisional IRA. He could receive compensation for his detention during the Troubles. I think he was jailed for about 3 or 4 years. That's off the top of my head. He might be able to buy himself some new Christmas lights and a timer, Jerry there. But Lord Glasman said this of Lord Hermer. They're obviously not friends. He told the New Statement, that is Lord Hermer, has got to go. He is the absolute archetype of an arrogant, progressive fool who thinks that law is a replacement for politics. They talk about the rule of law, but what they want is a rule for lawyers. Geez, you'd be on Hermer's side, wouldn't you, mate?
No. Having been in the law for a long time, I don't want the rule of lawyers either.
I suspect it's no. It doesn't. Rule of law sounds good. Rule of lawyers sounds pretty bloody awful. So we don't want to go down that path.
Any of us who spent 40 years in the law and kept our eyes open don't want to be ruled by a whole bunch of lawyers either.
I wrote a little piece today about, it just reminded me of how the judiciary operates in our capital territory, the Australian capital territory, Jack. And by gee whiz, you on this Valentine's Day, you'd be able, if you're married for 5 years, you'd be able to pull the old joke with the wife. Said, yeah, we've been married for 5 years. You don't get that long for murder in the ACT. Really are a little bit weak there. But here we've got another sacking, Jack, in the UK again. Not New South Wales. Health Minister Andrew Gwynn has been sacked over WhatsApp messages. Some of them were a bit strong, I've got to say. What's your take on it? I just, of course, we had some of Elon's ex-boys. Well, one of them in particular had some fairly strong views about ethnicity, in particular around the Indian population, Jack. And he was sacked, but then told he'd be rehired fairly soon. Rather than dwelling on all of this, wouldn't we just behave yourself on social media? Don't threaten people with, not threaten people with death, but say, look, I hope you die.
What did he say? He hoped a 72-year-old woman would soon be dead because she wrote to her local councillor about bin collections. This wasn't, I might add,
that's
on
excessive. I think by any standard, that is excessive.
Yeah, this wasn't on social media. This was on
these were letters to and fro, yeah.
Yeah, these were on a private WhatsApp group amongst a bunch of...
I'm sorry, I do apologise. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, we all make bad jokes and do that sort of stuff in private conversations. There's a bit of a lesson there. Don't presume that the people who are in your on your WhatsApp group are going to uphold your privacy equally. Like some of them might think, I can turn $1 out of this.
Well, I can. Yeah. Well, we only need to look at some of our NRL players, Jack, who have filmed snorting white substances up their nostrils, and then that becomes sort of public and you go, well, why would you trust people, even if you knew them well enough, to do that sort of thing, to be filmed doing that sort of stuff? It never ceases to amaze me how many people they do get. But Gwynn has been administratively suspended by the Labor Party in the United Kingdom, Jack, and all for having an internal conversation with a few people that he thought were his mates.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a lesson there. Folks. Keep your chat groups small and trust no one. All right.
Much better to tell these jokes in the pub in person rather than on WhatsApp.
Well, you never know who's filming, Jack. That's the point I make. We really do have. I was listening to a lovely little forum on the radio on the way home from Canberra today, and we really have to self-censor these days. Now, we can talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but have you in your social media entries, or posts, have you ever thought, well, I better not say that?
Yeah, probably. Oh, yeah. Well,
I think everyone does.
Yeah, to
but
some
perhaps
extent.
not thinking, well, the world will turn on me, and I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be the worst bastard on the planet.
A fairly good rule is don't post after about 10.
Don't post drunk. Never post drunk. I've got to say, I probably spend a bit more time on Instagram now, and some of my posts there coming across some idiots, anti-vaxxers and people that I really do despise, I went back and deleted a few of them because they were deeply unpleasant. Generally speaking...
I sort of tried for politeness. I never block anybody because...
Well, then you don't see what they're doing.
Well, I just don't care. If someone wants to say something to me, I really don't care by and large. Yeah. And I think I've only been blocked by Peter Fitzsimons and Mike Carlton, and that was for the serious crime of
what did you say, Jack? What did you
this
say?
was the serious crime of lèse-majesté, not providing sufficient respect. Nick Bryant, the ABC journalist, blocked me as well.
He blocked you too. He's a good bloke, Nick. I told you that. He's actually a good bloke.
Yeah, well, same thing all three times. I just sort of said, it was just, do you ever get tired of talking down to people, because they all do, all three do. And that apparently was insufficient.
You can't say that to a man of Peter Fitzsimmons' status, Jack.
Yeah, well, of course you
Blow in like you.
Yeah,
There's a man who's been around media for 50 years and you just barge in there and insult the man.
Well, it's not really insulting. It's just asking a question, asking a polite question.
It's a little bit insulting, Jack. Let's be honest. I found, and we've gone through this. Mike Carlton just blocked me for no reason. It was, as far as I can tell, it wasn't a post. We didn't have an exchange. I've never spoken to him on Twitter or X, but he just went, "No, you work at News Corp." I presume. I'm presuming. I may be wrong. I might be doing him a disservice, but he's got, this guy works at News Corp, and therefore he's the enemy. Blocked. Peter Fitzsimmons and I get on reasonably well, but I've given him a bit of a pasting in columns as well. He did. We should have covered this. Did you see the UFC? What's his name? Dana from the UFC came to Sydney. And they received, I think, $16 or $17 million injection of funds from the state of New South Wales to promote one of their events in Sydney. And Bevan Shields at the SMH, followed by a column or half a column from Pirate Pete. And Dana called Australian journalists the biggest pussies I've ever seen ever. And it was like, it's actually hard to argue with that when it comes to Bevan Shields and Peter Fitz.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm perfectly happy for Peter Fitzsimons and Mike Carlton and Nick Bryant to block me, but blocking's not something I want to do. But there you go.
Well, there's sort of libertarian sense that we should say whatever we feel. Is that we talk about that you get cancelled, but really what that is, it's cancelling in most cases is you have to deal with the consequences of what you've said or done. In social media, it's basically a said thing. It gets a bit crazy when we go back 10 or 15 years with someone's posts. And if you're in the journalism business, media business, entertainment business, or if you're just looking for a job, get onto your Twitter account and basically set it up so it deletes your comments after about a year. So you don't have this problem. You don't have that, oh my God, I called that bloke a so-and-so 15 years ago.
See, I don't think I've ever called anybody anything,
comma, you, you make your point, comma, you dirty, filthy.
No, so no, I've never
I have been
that.
guilty of that on occasion.
Yeah, no, so I've never done that. Well, the danger of the cancellation thing is that people turn their own Twitter feed into an absolute bubble, an echo chamber. So at the moment, if you have a look on Twitter, you can find a whole heap of otherwise sensible people who are sure that every aspect of the Australian media, including the ABC, is anti the Labor government and pro-Liberal National Party.
Yeah, see, a fair bit of that, yeah.
And I think the only way you can come to that conclusion is if your part of the Twitter that you see is absolutely in a bubble and absolutely, one side.
This is the bigger problem around internet echo chambers. I mean, first thing is, the libertarians and others will say you shouldn't have to self-censor, but self-censorship is not a bad thing. It's actually going, well, I'd rather not say that. It is that I'd rather not be insulting. I can make a point a different way. So self-censorship's not a bad thing. And people have to understand that essentially the business of being cancelled is really consequences. It's not you're not being cancelled. You are suffering consequences from what you've done or said. And it might be unfair, but tough shit. Be more sensible about what you do, in terms of, insulting people on the basis of race or ethnicity or anything like that. I'm not suggesting you do or that I do, Jack, but there are certain no-go areas, and those are the little red lights in our head that go, I'm not going to say that. Because it can be construed that way, or construed in a sort of an offensive way. So,
anyway, I had a bit of fun the other night. Some bloke was he was doing the pal. What do you think about this? So I answered the question.
It's a champ, isn't it? Pal is a champ. You're being champed.
Yeah, and so I answered the question and just made the at the end of it, I said, look, and I'm really pleased that we're pals.
Yeah, I do champ people quite a bit, actually. Look, to be honest, my days of being fiery on X are pretty much over, and I don't get in the ring there, but I have been a little bit unrestrained on Instagram, but. Yeah, I think there's a fair bit to be said that you're doom scrolling. You've just pumped up your blood pressure as well. You've got angry over something that really, I mean, the issue might matter, but the conflict or the confrontation, online confrontation with the person who's written something that you find offensive is of no moment.
Yeah, and if you want to be passionate, go to the pub, have a couple of beers, and do it there. Like, it's Friday afternoon,
End up sitting on your ass around my pub, Jack.
I'll be popping down to my local at 5:00 for a couple of beers, and they do have CCTV in there, but it doesn't work for about 5 years. So
wear a baseball cap and sunglasses. It's the perfect disguise, Jack.
Yeah. And besides, in Hong Kong. Particularly in my local, conversations can be pretty freewheeling without any real consequences.
Well, that's all a good thing. Now, we must move on to the United States. Jack Doge, Elon Musk Doge, we mentioned his team of nippers running around there. I believe one of them's been made a fairly senior member of the State Department. They have... And again, you look at social media in the United States, there is this division between people fretting, obviously Democrats or from the left and progressive, people fretting that Elon Musk, who's not an appointed government official, who's, well, I guess he is a government official, but he doesn't report to Congress. He doesn't really report to anyone. Have got stuck into things. While the other side will say, look at all the waste. Now, we did see Elon with his young boy X on his shoulders in the Oval Office there, Jack. And he was asked about the $50 million for condoms in Gaza. And that was something he'd put around a bit, but it turned out that $50 million was designed as an anti-HIV spread measure in Madagascar, I think. And he said, look, I'm never going to bat 1,000. So there are times, well, it would be nice if you actually set aside some time to correct the record rather than have to have it sort of, squeezed out of you. Frankly, I think the point you made, or you've quoted something here, is that governments themselves, particularly a vast one with multi-trillion-dollar budget like the United States, there is going to be waste there, right? There is going to be waste, no matter who runs it or how.
Yeah. So it's like any large organisation. So look what happened in Australia when we really ran the microscope over the big insurance companies and the big banks. We found a lot of unconscionable behaviour, a lot of waste.
Yeah. You'd find that pretty much in any corporation.
Yeah, and something as big as the United States government
Yeah.
You're going to find heaps of it. I mean, the US Defense Department has a budget of $800 billion.
It may as well. Well, it's $1 trillion Australian anyway, but it may as well be $1 trillion budget. Yeah.
Yeah, and it hasn't done an audit for 20 years.
Well, it's never been required to do an audit check. It's never completed one. You're quite right.
Yeah.
I think 2018 was the first time it was asked to complete an audit. That was in Trump's first term, obviously. But it has failed to do so in every year since. And that's not ideal. And there may be, sort of deep state stuff going on there around the Pentagon that they don't want disclosed. But there might just be this sense that it's just an almost endless supply of money and we're going to spend it on crazy stuff every now and then.
Yep. Or just not bother to account properly for how we're spending it, how we're going about it. So I've got no problem with them going through it. And of course they're going to find some stuff. Are they going to get it all right? No, they're not. Absolutely no way.
Of course they're not, because they're making political points with a view to making fairly savage cuts. I think in the case of USAID, which we went through last week, and some of it at least, USAID does a hell of a lot of good work. Yes, there is waste there because it's another substantial budget. But in terms of American soft power, soft diplomacy, it does great humanitarian work in large measure. It's done things like reduce infant mortality in sub-Saharan Africa significantly. And there's no one else. Trust me, the Russians aren't running around running health programs in the DRC. So really, it's only the Americans are doing this. So when you bastardize or you delegitimize a group like USAID, as Musk has done, understand that this is going to cost lives. This is going to cost people's lives.
If you go back to the George W. Bush days, they did an enormous amount of good work with HIV retrovirals in Africa, because the governments over there more or less take the view that there is no AIDS in Africa because our chaps just don't do that sort of thing.
We're not having condoms.
Yeah. And they did a lot of good work. But there's all sorts of questions about what they're actually doing with USAID is moving some of these functions back into the State Department where they used to be. 50 years ago.
Look, going back even further, Jack, a great many of the rise of abstract artists in the United States, including Jackson Pollock. We, of course, have Blue Poles sitting in our National Gallery.
Sitting in the basement.
Jackson Pollock. They were essentially funded by the CIA. And not just that, the CIA were funding Philharmonic orchestras, high art stuff. It was about saying at the particular journey, we're talking about now in the 1950s in the United States or around the world, it was about them saying, we're from the West, we're from the United States, and we have more culture than these Russian slobs. That's what it was doing. It was a propaganda exercise, but was it harmful? I don't think so. So, I mean, you could make a very good argument that it's not the way to spend taxpayers' money, but in that particular context of the Cold War, they were saying we have a higher culture than you guys. Our culture is stronger and independent. It wasn't really independent because it was being a little bit subsidised by the CIA.
Yeah.
All righty. Now, there was a bit of a Barney sticking with the Trump administration, Jack, when a federal court judge intervened and brought down interim injunctions in regard to some of these cuts and some of the dismissals, Jack. And then we had Vice President J.D. Vance and Elon Musk saying, look, why don't we just avoid the courts? What do you think of that? What do you make of that?
This is going to be interesting to see how it plays out, to be quite honest.
Well, they have breached the injunctions that are in place, yeah.
Yeah. There's always tension between the executive branch and the judicial branch, and it always gets tested. One of the things that's happening, and has happened for some time in the US, is you get an individual federal court judge granting an injunction that covers the whole country. And that's a question that I think will end up properly before the Supreme Court, and I think it's unlikely to survive.
But we're talking about an interim injunction. So he's not saying, I'm going to knock it over. I'm saying this is a federal court judge in Rhode Island, I believe, Jack.
Yeah,
and I think it's a he, and he's an Obama appointee. Woo, that was made clear in a lot of right wing media. He's basically saying, look, interim injunction while we have a look at all of this, and I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah, well, the difficulty is sometimes those interim injunctions go for months and months and months and months. I don't think the Supreme Court will. I think the Supreme Court will vastly restrict the use by single federal court judges of interim injunctions to prevent stuff happening.
But this is checks and balance stuff, isn't it? I mean, as much as Trump or Musk would have you believe otherwise, presidential power in the United States is not unlimited.
No. Chuck Schumer, meanwhile, says, look, they should leave yes, there is fraud and waste and all that sort of stuff, but they should leave it all to us in the Congress to fix. And, gee, that's not going to fly.
It's not going to fly. I mean, when you do look at polling, and I know we're in a very, very early stage in the electoral cycle in the United States, but when you look at presidential approval ratings, the approval ratings of other significant political figures, perhaps senior Democrats, etc., they don't look all that flash. But when you ask people whether they believe Congress is working or not, only about 6% of Americans. Well, no, I am exaggerating. It's really as bad as like about 15, 20% tops actually supports Congress.
Yeah. In terms of the only poll that caught my eye at all this week was, it's a Reuters thing that they do. I think they do it every day. Do you think the country's on the right track or the wrong track?
Yeah, we did it last week. Yeah.
And for the first time in 20 years, it was 47 right, 46 wrong. So.
Wait till those inflation numbers kick in, Jack.
It's
inflation
and it's 1%, but and the fact that it's the first time in 20 years indicates that they're off to at the moment, some of the individual things they're doing are unpopular, but overall they're going okay. In terms of popularity.
Yeah. Oh, look, as I say, a little bit too early, but look, inflation. Just while we're thinking about the inflation rate, popped up to 3% from 2.9 in December.
Yep.
That was considered too high. That was considered, the markets didn't think that it would jump up, and of course it's January, so there's not much. You could point a finger at the Trump administration over this. The February, March figures, etc., are going to be really significant. And really, where the rubber hits the road is food prices, petrol prices, those sorts of things. Yeah. So those are things that we need to have a look at. Yes, so there's been some to and fro in the op-eds, Jack, in the United States about USAID and about the separation of powers. Is there anything that you would like to highlight there?
No, nothing we haven't already covered. It's that will all just play out.
Oh, look, Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s been sworn in, Jack. A terrific move. Look, we could argue about this, but I think in the end, Bobby Kennedy Jr. will kill more people than Elon Musk and Donald Trump combined. When the numbers stack up in a couple of centuries, is there any upside to this? I'm trying to think how to see a positive out of this. I mean, Kennedy Jr. has enriched himself through anti-vax misinformation, disinfo. He's completely hippie-style mad when it comes to health treatments, and he's got some bizarre ideas. And I'm thinking, is there any sort of silver lining here? And maybe it will be that Americans will start thinking more about healthcare than they obviously do now. Their figures are terrible, by the way. They are, I think, 55th in terms of life expectancy. And some are in the 50s. I won't give the specific number because in case I get it wrong, in terms of neonatal deaths and deaths in children up to the age of 5. They're really up there with sort of developing world type stats. So something's right, and it wasn't always that way. So it's not as if this has been something that America has dealt with for the last 20 or 30 years. Look, there's lots of reasons for it. One of them I would argue is their health system, or the funding of it, is part of the problem there, and people won't go to hospitals because they're going to be, twist an ankle and you end up getting bankrupted.
Part of the problem is that they, this goes back about 35 or 40 years, I think, they linked health insurance to employment.
Yeah, it's another thing. And, I think the number of completely uninsured Americans has actually declined in the last 4 years. But still, you've got a lot of people who will just say, I can't get medical treatment. Well,
and because it's linked to employment, the quality of the health insurance it varies greatly, and you've got no control over what sort of insurance you have. That's determined by your employer.
Yeah. So if you have, let's say, detected or has been detected by your doctor a lump in the body somewhere, and the doctor wants you to have an MRI, but the insurance company won't cover you for the MRI, then you're out of pocket for what's probably $1,000 US.
Yeah. We can do a whole show on this. Let's.
We do. We better move on because we got Ukraine and Russia. Trump and Putin have now spoken, Jack, and I think the Ukrainians are a little bit upset, but they're trying not to look at Ukraine's NATO membership is clearly off the table. The return of Crimea is already off the table, and these are just from Trump and Putin speaking. So I watched Four Corners it was a good show. They did say, we're the first people to do this, and then I checked, and the Daily Mail had done an extensive documentary about it. The concentration was on drone warfare in both of those stories. But there is a sense, certainly among the Ukrainian soldiers, that Trump may not be able to deliver a peace. When Trump was asked whether he thought Vladimir Putin wanted peace, he said, I believe he does. I think he would tell me if he didn't. He does sound naive sometimes. Are Ukraine going to be given the shit sandwich, Jack? It does look that way.
Yeah, too early to say.
Yeah, well, they've already, just on the basis of unilateral conversations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, a couple of things have been taken off the table. Look, I
don't think getting Crimea back was ever on the table.
Geez, they had an opportunity there, just a little bit of sniff that they might have been able to pull that off. There's intense fighting on the Ukrainian front at the moment because they want, both sides want the battle lines to move. So it may well be, and in fact, J.D. Vance is the one who proposed that we call on the battle lines now. That's whose territory belongs to who. So the NATO thing was unacceptable to Russia, and that really can't be. But maybe the Ukrainians can use that as a bargaining chip. As it stands, it's just been wiped out.
Yeah, well, Crimea definitely was never on the table. I don't think. Probably NATO really wasn't either. So let's just see where it ends up.
Yeah, well, there is a plan to meet in Saudi Arabia.
and then in Europe as well. And one of the things to remember,
Vlad won't go to Europe, mate.
one of the things that is to remember about this is that we don't get to see or hear all of the conversations that are going on.
Probably Donald doesn't either because he doesn't speak Russian, so he relies on his translator. I think Putin's English isn't so bad, although translating Trump would have its difficulties. Look, yes, it is there. I think both sides want peace. I know the Ukrainians want peace, but they want a peace where they don't, where it's not couched in an abject surrender.
It's unlikely that both of them are going to walk away with what they want, or either of them are going to walk away with what they want.
Well, it's not going to be knocked over in a week. It's an incredibly damaging war, and it would be great if it came to an end. But I don't think we could sort of look at that as a success if the Ukrainians were essentially bent over in talks. Meanwhile, Jack, have they got the 36-hole golf course going in Gaza yet? Plenty of parking, shops. Be beautiful, Jack. They will own it. They will own it, even though they're not going to spend any money to buy it.
Yeah. The King of Jordan turned up in Washington the other day. He did. This really is a watch and see.
I mean, look, the same rules apply as we've been discussing throughout from October 7 onwards. The same rules apply on how this is going to get done, and whether how a peaceful, an enduring peace can be fought, and what sovereignty the Palestinians will receive. Trump was always a supporter of the two-state solution in his first term, and he was very close to Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian political group, not Liberation Organisation, but he was very close to Abbas and regarded him very fondly. And then someone showed him a 2-minute clip of Abbas sort of saying, they're not terrorists, they're heroes and all this sort of stuff. And Trump was believed that he'd been betrayed. So he hasn't actually spoken to anyone. He's spoken to Netanyahu. Because when Trump did come up in his first term and said, look, if everyone wants a two-state solution, and I'm happy with that, let's do that. Then Netanyahu got in touch with him and said he was deeply unhappy with that. And pretty much since that time, and when Trump turned on Abbas, it's been a case that Trump really hasn't had any conversation to the Palestinians. And so, yeah, it's we'll wait and see how that goes. I don't think the 36-hole golf course is going to be built in a hurry. Put it that way.
One of the things I've certainly been saying from the beginning, from October 8th on, is don't worry about what current or former foreign ministers in the West are saying, or what the demonstrators on the streets of London are saying. Watch what the other Arab countries are doing.
That's the point I was trying to make. I got a little bit waylaid. Absolutely right. So it's how the Arab world responds to it. Donald Trump did say all hell would break loose if all the hostages were not returned this weekend, Jack. I don't know. He's not a reader. We know he's not a reader. But the terms of the ceasefire that everyone agreed to mean that three more hostages will be released on Saturday. I think there are some 36 outstanding. No, it might be more than that, but a number of those are considered deceased. So the terms of the ceasefire is 3 this weekend, and according to the reports that I was reading today, that seems to be the case. That will all be handled reasonably well, but it'll only be 3. And that's everyone's expectation. So there you go. Moving on to sport, Jack. Sam Kerr was acquitted of racial hatred, or whatever the silly laws they have in the UK. Fair dinkum, mate. If you're a copper and someone calls you white and dumb and you don't like that, or you're offended by that, mate, you've just got to harden up.
This should have been sorted a long time ago.
Yeah, but the coppers wouldn't do it. You know, this guy didn't pull the race card, and then he did.
Yeah. They offered to sort it on the spot if she paid for damages and paid for the loss of the Thingo shift. And she, let's be polite about this, she rejected the suggestion outright. What should have happened is that she should have been called back in the next day or the day after that, right. and said we can fix this.
I'll get you a coffee. Now, this is what if you want this to go away, this is what you got to do.
Got to do, exactly right. What I can't understand is where were Chelsea, the Chelsea Football Club, in all of this? Because football clubs are generally fairly good at fixing this sort of problem. You know, they turn up with a reasonably good lawyer and say, "Look, you know, she was as full as a state school."
The Brits don't care nearly enough about women's sport. That's the first thing. So the women's competition in the Premier League is very much secondary. Now, if it had been one of the big signings at Chelsea, the men's team, or Liverpool, or Man U, or Man City, or Arsenal, you better believe it'll be sorted out very quickly.
Yeah.
So, a bit of a failure there on the club's part. They have been supportive of her, but she's allowed to go back.
It's going to cost a lot of money.
Now, Australians have been wringing their hands. The commentariat in Australia have been wringing their hands as to whether she should be allowed to captain Australia again. Captain the Matildas again. What's your thoughts, Jack?
My thoughts are the same about the cricket post the sandpaper thing. Pick the best captain.
There you go. It's actually a really tough one in the men's at the moment. Steve Smith's captaincy in Sri Lanka is excellent. It's been excellent.
But it's still what you do is who's the best captain, they get the job.
Matthew Kuhnemann been pulled up. Reports made by umpiring staff. So that may be down to the match referee or one of the other non-presiding umpires at the two tests in Sri Lanka. He's been pulled up. Oh well, you wouldn't say he's been pulled up for chucking. He's been advised that at least some of those officials believe that his action is suspect. Jack, give me your thoughts.
That's the same thing as being called a chucker.
His action is suspect. Now, it's a really
complex, very polite way of saying you're
really
a chucker,
complex rules where you've got to get the slide rule out and measure the bend in the arm. So, but as a rule, you can bend the arm, but you can't straighten it on release. And I don't see that. So I don't see that in the case of Matthew Kuhnemann.
He looks a lot like Derek Underwood when he bowls to me.
There's definitely a bend in the arm, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. Well, you can't bend the arm too much. You know, you got to get the old slide rule, and I think, it's 11 centimetres.
15 degrees.
15 degrees, thank you very much. So what he has to do now is he'll be assessed by a biomedical specialist who will review his action under, CGI type conditions. Then a report will be made to the ICC.
They put these sensors all over your body and your arms, and they can plot them. They can plot them in a 3D sense, right? Because if you watch video of him, you're only getting a 2D sense of what's happening. So they use these sensors to give a 3D sense of what's happening, right? But like I say, to me, he looks like a slightly slower version of Derek Underwood. And what did Derek play? 100-something tests. So he looks all right to me.
Used to go through on some greedily prepared wickets. He used to go through the Australians on a fairly regular basis.
He always struggled against the West Indies because Vivian and the rest of them thought he was just a poor medium pacer. So
right. Off spinners. What? Yeah. There's a magnificent DVD that I got very quickly, and it's called The Greats of the 80s, and Viv Richards is in it, and right up the front as you'd expect. And the number of times they throw highlights and it goes, and Ray Bright comes into bowl. Oh, he's hit that a long way. Greg Matthews. Greg Matthews comes in to bowl. Oh, Viv Richards has hit that a long way. Anyway, yes, he'll go through a process. This happened to Chris Green, I think, is the most recent one. Chris Green, who plays for New South Wales and the Sydney Thunder. And he plays a lot of franchise cricket around the world. And he basically had to sit out of the game for a year. So we hope Matthew Kuhnemann gets through that process, the bio process, and can resume his cricket for Queensland fairly soon.
Yep.
By the way, it looks like South Australia and Tasmania for the Shield final, Jack, with South Australia finishing on top. Who'd have guessed it? South Australia finished on the bottom last year. All right, Super Bowl. Any highlights?
Well, I went looking for them, but I was told there was none.
A lot of stop and start in that game, isn't there?
It was a very dull game. The only highlight I saw was Taylor Swift getting booed 2 or 3 times. But, of course, she is from Philadelphia herself, and she was barracking for the other team. So, and the Eagles fans...
She's copped a spray from the Eagles fans, yeah.
Yeah, for being disloyal to her Philadelphia background. But she has been incredibly good for the NFL, and particularly for the Chiefs. I saw an interview with the chief financial officer for the Chiefs, and it's a private company, so he wasn't talking absolute numbers, but his description of the benefit the Chiefs have had from her association with Travis Kelce. She's been enormous. And for the NFL overall, they're getting recognition now from Gen Z women that they never, ever got. Yeah, sure. And that's worth billions and billions of dollars, you know. Got to the point where my daughter, who's a 39-year-old Aussie, said, I actually know who the Eagles and the Chiefs are, Dave. You know?
Wow. She's ahead of me. But one thing I want to pick up from the Kansas City Chiefs, they were headed for, they were thwarted by the Eagles, but they were headed for what Americans, and with this language is filtered into Australia, of course, a three-peat, Jack, a three-peat. We've got a term for this. It's called a hat-trick. I don't understand why we have three-peats. I mean, I think Hawthorn were the last ones who were going for the three-peat, weren't they, in the AFL? Call it a hat-trick. Jesus Christ, you clowns. All right, now the Swannies, they got a bit of a touch-up in the grand final, and it was 2 in 3 years, wasn't it? So what are they doing, Jack, with a new coach? Horst Longmire has retired as coach, and Dean Cox, the former Eagles ruckman, and always been around the club as a player's guy, so he's got a very different role now. He's been putting through a bit of mental torture, Jack.
Horse is working in the business side of the club now.
Is he?
And Dean Cox was interviewed the other day, and he said that they had the first day of training, the first day everyone was back at training. He surprised the players by having a review of the grand final. It took 7.5 hours to go through the grand final. The first minute took an hour.
They did, and I'm a little bit dubious on the distance, but this was before their first official training in the new year. But they went out for the 5K time trial.
Yeah, around Centennial Park. Yeah.
And Dean Cox, when they all got back, said, "That was good. Let's do it again."
Yeah. But I actually like that they took an hour to spend over what happened in the first minute of the grand final, because this is addressing, did you guys not turn up, you know?
Oh, look, I remember very similar circumstances. Justin Langer did that after Australia were beaten at it was the English skipper went bananas and played the innings of his life. And Australia dropped a couple of catches and missed. It was a missed run out on Nathan Lyon, and Justin Langer sat them all down.
That was the World Cup final.
No, it wasn't the World Cup final. It was a Test match. Because Lyon was playing, so it was a Test match. Stokes went bananas and made 160 and won the game for them almost single-handedly, and then he made the players. sit and watch the replay, the last day's play, again the following day, and it did not go over well. I think there's an end point to all that stuff, and you don't want to humiliate people. And poor old Nathan Lyon had to watch the missed run out again, which he completely ran out 99 times out of 100 and just got that wrong. I mean, sometimes you just have to accept that. Stokes was too good, and Australia made critical mistakes at critical times. But you don't want to be actually flogging people with Cox and the Swans. Certainly, there needs to be something sorted out about that, because 2 and 3 years beltings, there's a question mark over a lot of their key players. Are they hard enough? Are they? I still maintain that they're a very good side that just didn't turn up in a couple of grand finals, and maybe you don't need to concentrate on that too much, but you definitely need to get a response from the players that it's unacceptable.
At the halfway mark, they were easily the best side in the comp, and yet twice in 3 years they sort of haven't turned up on grand final day.
Yeah.
So that's a problem you've got to look at. Yeah,
you do. And you've got to be honest about it. You don't want to flog or humiliate people, but you've got to get a response, an explanation in their minds as to why it happened. All righty. Well, we're going over a little bit of time there, but these are important matters. We must do a little bit of an AFL review fairly soon too, Jack, because the season ain't far away. I think we're about, I think it's less than 6 weeks now. So we'll have to get stuck into that. There's a fair bit we want to get stuck into in the future, but we hope you have enjoyed what we've discussed today, listeners, and we look forward to coming back next week and doing it all over again, and concentrating on a few, the Donald Trump. I tell you what, if you're working a news office at the moment or news department, you would, and there were 10 people in it, you'd set 5 aside just to look at Trump, and 2 would be doing the sport and 1 would be doing the weather. So that's the way it is at the moment. Very heavy news from the United States. Not all of it good, but not all of it that bad either. And the thing about politics that I think a lot of people don't understand, Jack, but I think we grasp pretty cleverly, is what goes up must come down. That is the rule of gravity in politics. Yes?
Yeah. Well, I think the correct term is reverts to the mean.
Well, that's very, very mathematical of you, Jack. I like it. What goes up must come down, and that's the way it is. We're looking at Trump at the absolute height of his powers at the moment, and in 2 years' time, those powers may well be in the shitter, and we just don't know. But that's the way it can go, and it will go at some point. It's just a matter of when. So don't worry too much, folks. We'll be across everything when we bring to you episode 103. What was it, 102? 104? I don't know. Anyway, we'll do it. Cheers.